Hello and welcome back to Dr. Deep State. Today I'd like to talk about a book from 1970 called Between Two Ages by Zbigniew Brezinski. And while doing so, I'd like it to tie into some of these other ideas that we've had. So we get this idea of this grand destiny of the course, and we're going to work that piece out. Before I continue, I would like to give a thanks to Charles Patterson and thank him for his comments and his contribution to the development of our course thus far. So, I've titled some of these things the lunatics and their ideas that started back from the lunar society that launched evolution and so forth. Of course, these ideas are much older and much broader than that. And as I develop the next phase of ideas, I'm going to take a step back in time and go over one grand idea that works its way throughout human history and into, according to the deep state oligarchs, their final eschatology. And that idea is alchemy. But let's just begin here with the introduction to this work. Now, when I'm talking about Brzezinski, I'm going to be moving around the book, and I don't know if there's kind of a coherent idea, but what I want to do is connect him to some of the lunatics and their idea, and we're going to start to maybe see an unfolding of this grander scheme that the our oligarchical elites have in mind. So let me begin here on page 65. This is Between Two Ages. Brzezinski writes, man has always sought to crystallize some organizing principle that would, by creating order out of chaos, relate him to the universe and help define his place in it. And I don't want to beat this up right now, but that's a very alchemical idea. Of course, the oligarchical tradition about making history happen and unfold in the manner that they're choosing is about making order out of chaos. But I think it's couched in an even deeper esoteric idea of alchemy. And when we see this idea of how man shapes the world, usually through his gnosis, he redefines not only his place in the world, but the world itself. And this is kind of what we would call the great work that we're chasing down and trying to make sense of it. So as we get to the portion where we're watching the daily news, we can see if it fits into the pattern of the course that we've discussed thus far. So he's saying, we, the planners, and Brzezinski is going to be famous as sort of this large late 20th century geostrategic planner. He's usually associated with this motif of a grand chessboard, and there's these geostrategists that place people, nations, times into situations to their liking in terms of how they want the world to unfold. So he's one of these, if you want to call it, high-minded thinkers. And we're talking about between two ages here. He's really talking about the advent of this information grid, the internet, and it's about to be in place. And he's kind of giving some of that information about what it's all about, how it fits in, if you read it in esoteric terms, to this larger great work. Him as a geostrategist, and we've talked about other philosophers and biologists, and they're all kind of putting together their piece as PR mouthpieces for the oligarchical class. So between two ages, we can kind of see there was the world that we talked about with the Charles Galton Darwins and the Wells and so forth. And now he's talking about this new era that's going to come. And so what is the information? Is it about democratizing, information to the world? Is that what the internet is about to him? And how does what he's saying, compared to Bertrand Russell's and H.G. Wells and their idea of a technocratic dictatorship and so forth? And what we see is somebody that's very much in line with and in cahoots with these same other oligarchical, I won't even call them planners. Again, I believe they're the PR people for the powers that are less seen. So here on page 32, The United States has been most active in the promotion of a global communication system by means of satellites, and it is pioneering the development of a far wide information grid. It is expected that such a grid will come into being by about 1975. For the first time in history, the cumulative knowledge of mankind will be made accessible on a global scale, and it will be almost instantaneously available in response to demand. So he's talking about what's going on in the sort of incubator of the United States is going to be launched into a sort of worldwide web of information. And of course, we're going to get this idea, the web of control. And when I think about two ages, this harkens back to this idea that I'll get into way back into Francis Bacon, who is very much, again, between two ages, the age of alchemy and the age of science. And he's kind of creating this idea of this new organum or the new Atlantis, which of course is America, again, as this incubator. So he's standing in between two ages, sort of regarbing up this ancient alchemical agenda. That's Francis Bacon. And of course, whether he's an individual or a committee, he's connected from everything real or perceived to the King James Bible, to writing Shakespeare. But certainly he is launching these early works, even connected with, the alchemist John Dee and this idea of, channeling spirits and seeing England as the oligarch's tool to launch the next phase of this mission. So a lot of the themes here in Brzezinski are going to herald back to that last launching pad, I believe, of Francis Bacon, putting the new organum or the new Atlantis in America. And what was kind of tinkered with in an alchemical fashion here in America would sort of be the prototypical launching of this web. And so we're really talking about some of the elements of control getting high tech here and even virtual. So Brzezinski says here on page 15, he's going to talk about, now he's talking about this web that we now call the, internet superhighway, or the internet. And he gets right, it's about control. Is that a shocker? Um, Speaking of a future at most only a decades away, he's looking into the late 20th century here. This is 1970. I foresee a time when we shall have the means and therefore inevitably, because if we have the means, inevitably, and he's not saying some other group or some shadow, he's we and this class of geostrategic uh, game makers, game changers. The grand chessboard is how he's thinking of it in these terms. So the temptation to manipulate the behavior and intellectual functioning of all people through environment and biochemical manipulation of the brain. So we took this at one point all the way back to the behavioral movement out of Leipzig, Germany, and Wundt, and all the, Pavlov went in this way, and with Skinner and so forth. They would sort of try to take the soul of man out of him and be able to, with all the tools, tinker with man and make him a putty in the hands of the oligarchical elite, whether through their education system or through their media. And we've discussed both of those. So the tools are in place. And now Brzezinski is talking about taking it from another level besides media manipulation, besides working through religious institutions and the educational institutions, that we're talking about a real different level of wizardry here. And so again, we think of that, famous quote that any highly advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And that's where he's kind of dealing with this alchemical theme right now. Um, so Brzezinski, page 253, I've hopped to the back here, connecting a few things to see if we can thread some ideas together again. So when we talk about the purpose here is really, one might just also use this technology for social control, from everything from the brain to the nervous system, just advancing behavioral techniques of control. Persisting social crisis. Where do you get this? Manufacturing events. Persisting social crisis, like by accident, or are we the controllers manufacturing the social crisis? The emergence of a charismatic personality, and the exploitation of mass media to obtain public confidence would be the stepping stones in the peaceful transformation of the United States into a highly controlled society. Wow, where do I start with that? Well, order out of chaos. You know, you have the plan of where you want things to go, you work the dialectic, the right left, you create the problem, you have the solution, ergo changeo. So, but he's saying right here, a highly controlled society. Now, this guy's like a pinup. I believe there's some morning show and his daughter's on it, and he makes these like he's some kind of superhero, kind of thing. I mean, is this about what the framers were talking about, making free, strong, independent individuals that could decide their own destiny? No, he's hooking this up way back to Francis Bacon and this new organum, that this was the inevitable conclusion to this great alchemical project in the United States, that it would in fact be a highly controlled. So, when we talk about the Huxleys and the Russells and so forth, and loving your servitude, these are all getting tied together. And what I'm going to argue is that the United States, at large, the world, humanity is the alchemical process. They themselves, this oligarchical class, are seeing themselves as the oligarchs, or what Charles Galton Darwin would call the wild men, but they're the alchemists, and they're connecting to this experiment and how their experiment here in humanity is part of their projection and their ascension. Does it sound wacky? Well, I've attempted to continuously tie this together over the centuries. So, as crazy as it sounds when we hear it, we're going to fine tune that so that we can see it happening in the news on a daily basis.